So, Excellencies, colleagues, good afternoon and welcome to this event on addressing chemicals of concern in the Future Plastics Treaty. Today's session is hosted by the governments of Mexico and Switzerland, supported by the Forum of Trade, Environment and SDGs, also known as TESS. For those of you who I haven't yet met, my name is Lucy Fuller and I'm Senior Policy Advisor at TESS. The fact that we have a well-attended room here today and a full and diverse panel is a good indication of the level of interest and the importance of this critical issue. A warm welcome to everyone who's attending online from around the world today. So what is the goal of today's event? We're here because effectively addressing the chemicals of concern in plastics and plastic products is key to achieving the objective of protecting human health and the environment from plastic pollution. Year on year, we're hearing more and more about the range of adverse impacts associated with chemicals of concern that are widely used in a range of plastic products. Reports from the scientific community, from civil society, from UNEP, the WHO, the BRS Secretariat, and others have contributed over the years to the growing body of knowledge of the range of impacts and our understanding. We now know that the presence of chemicals of concern in plastics have impacts across the full life cycle of plastics. And yet, in a context where supply chains are highly integrated and where cross-border trade is vast and expanding, a lack of transparency and common global rules means that the risk cannot effectively be managed by governments or business in the absence of common international efforts. We all know that international cooperation on this topic is proving challenging, but the scientific evidence supporting the need for action is clear, as is the determination of a broad range of INC members to find ways forward. At the last negotiation meeting in Busan, 94 countries supported a declaration led by Mexico, emphasizing that the treaty must include a clear, legally binding obligation to phase out the most harmful plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastics. Without this, they were clear that the treaty will fail to deliver a predictable regulatory framework that's urgently needed. So today we'll hear from a diverse range of governments that have continued considering the options for such an obligation, with the aim of crafting a global approach on chemicals of concern in plastic products that allows for evolution over time, promotes transparency, and provides appropriate flexibility to account for different national circumstances. So on our panel today, we have the opportunity to hear from a number of key actors from governments leading on this issue. Tania Munoz from Mexico, Sam Adukabi of Ghana, Halatua Fua of the Cook Islands, and Andreas Binden of Switzerland. Oh my gosh. We also have a wonderful range of technical experts here today. Professor Martin Wagner, lead author of the PlasChem report, who will share a scientific perspective on the imperative of addressing chemicals of concern in the plastics instrument. Dr. Jane Munke, who will give reflections on some of the sensitive applications that could be prioritized for regulating chemicals of concern in plastic products. And Dr. Zanyun Wang, who will reflect on governance gaps that the Plastic Treaty can help address, as well as synergies with existing international conventions and frameworks, opportunities to avoid duplication, and options for ensuring responsiveness of this instrument over time to emerging evidence. Together with our hosts today, Mexico and Switzerland, we hope this event will support ongoing efforts to foster constructive, focused dialogue among a broad range of INC members on ways forward, including amongst the colleagues who are gathered in Geneva for the BRS COP this week and next. I'll be keeping time today because we do have quite limited time and a large panel. I'll ring my bell at 6 minutes and again at 7 if we happen to go over time. And we'll finish today with a round of rapid questions from the audience here gathered in Geneva. So to begin today's panel discussion, it's my pleasure to introduce Tania Munoz from Mexico, who will outline the work that has been taking place. Thank you, Tania, and thank you for Mexico's leadership on this very important issue. You have the floor.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's an honor for Mexico to co-sponsor this event jointly with the government of Switzerland and the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDG to address, along with the experts, what we consider the heart of the new legally binding instrument on plastic pollution, including the marine environment. We are pleased to have you with us today, including the parties and stakeholders who are online. Based on the latest studies, as you know, more than 13,000 chemicals have been identified as associated with plastic and plastic production across a wide range of applications. Women and children are particularly susceptible to these toxic chemicals. Exposure can have severe or long adverse effects on several key periods of a woman's life and may impact the next generations. So what we're doing here in that sense, as you know, in Busan, during INC 5.1, 94 member states expressed that the Article 3 on plastic product and chemicals in the instrument text must contain a clear, legally binding obligation to phase out the most harmful plastic products and chemicals of concern, of course, in plastic. Without such an obligation, the instrument will fail to protect the human health and the environment. This statement in that moment was delivered by Mexico on behalf of these countries in the final plenary. And also in Busan, a group of 58 member states has submitted a concrete proposal for Article 3. You know this proposal that is functional and at the same time ambitious, leaving some flexibility. For us, it's very important, this ambition, but at the same time, the flexibility of the vision of this article. The proposal contains an initial list of plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products to be globally eliminated. The countries supporting this proposal are from different regions and different economic situations. This shows us, of course, that it's possible to come together and define meaningful provisions. In this endeavor, many comments and concerns from different delegations were considered in this proposal. So this final proposal reflects the concern of many regions, and as I mentioned before, is ambitious, but at the same time is flexible, according with the national condition and the national capacity. Since Busan, an informal core group, as you know, with country representatives from all UN regions, co-chaired by Mexico and Switzerland, continue the work and further develop the following core text proposal for Article 3 on the basis of the chair text. For us also is very important this point. We consider this basis for the chair text. The result of this informal working group on Article 3 is that we have cleaned up text and improved the current chair text that came out of INC 5.1. In doing this work, we made sure that the key elements to make Article 3 work are maintained and clarified. Today, I want to mention these key elements on Article 3. In general terms, what are the key points of Article 3 that we improve? Okay, I would like to focus on 4 key elements on this article that include, in first point, the approach with a global, legally binding control measure. This includes a restriction of certain plastic products to be listed in an annex to the treaty, and control measure enable national action. So we have this two-step approach with this legally binding control measure, and at the same time, the possibility to implement this national action. We think that this two-step approach makes the article effective, while at the same time leaving flexibility to countries for national action. So in the second place, as a second key points, we include, as you know, the chemicals of concern in the provision to ensure effective coverage of harmful substances in plastic products. This is the second key points of this Article 3. And as a third point, a provision that consider a mechanism that empowers the conference of the parties to take decisions on the future listing of plastic products. So this opened the possibility to include new plastic product or chemicals of concern. So it's very important, this third point. And chemicals of concern in plastic products, microplastic, of course, which consider expert recommendation and technical and scientific information. There might be a situation where the parties decide to add a plastic product on the global list, but for one country that is not possible to national reason, that's why we need a clear mechanism to amend annexes, including the option of a vote if not consensus can be reached, like similar to the Stockholm Convention. This ensures that the treaty can respond to new risks and scientific findings and continue to protect human health and environment effectively. So as a final key points, an initial list of plastic products, as I mentioned, is initial. We can analyze the inclusion of new plastic depending on the scientific or technical information that we have. The countries have the possibility to include these new materials. So this initial list of chemicals of concern in plastic products and products contain intentionally added microplastic to be included in the treaty from the beginning and that are subject to a global restriction. So these are the four key points that we consider basic in the treaty. As I mentioned before, is ambition, but for us at the same time is flexible. Well, today we would like to reflect with you on the well-known human health effects and the environment impacts associated with chemicals of concern widely used in plastics and plastic products across the full life cycle of plastic. That's another point very important for us, not only as a waste. Instead, we think in the full life cycle of plastic, as well as the economic impacts of the indiscriminate use, including the cost of inaction. And finally, we return here to Geneva in August with a proposed text with sufficient elements that provides tranquility and shows our society of the high commitment that we have towards controlling plastic pollution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm delighted to now introduce colleagues from Ghana and the Cook Islands who will also share their reflections. First, Sam Adukumi of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, colleagues. I'm happy to be part of this afternoon discussion, and I can see that perhaps I'm the only African around here, perhaps, and so I speak with an R. I can see some colleagues around. I speak an African voice, of course, as a developing country as well. I'm Ghana. I will share some few highlights about what we believe that are very critical to the future treaty on plastics. But before I go on, I'd like to assure you that many African countries, including my country, Ghana, were part of the 94 member states that actually expressed that the article on plastic products and chemicals in the instrument text must contain a clear, legally binding obligation to phase out the most harmful plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastics, which was delivered by Mexico on our behalf. And so the 3 points I would like to share are as follows. First of all, that life cycle approach is so important to us. The sense that those of us who are chemists or who know some chemistry, everything has a beginning and also an end. So you cannot tackle an issue midstream or from the end of it without really tackling the source. That's why UNEA is in its own wisdom said that let us use the life cycle approach. So it begins from production and then ends in disposal, or even now the circular economy, it goes on, but at the end of the day, definitely you have to dispose of some of these chemicals. And that's the scope of the Union Resolution 5/14. And so we cannot tackle, as I said, from somewhere. So this is very key to ensuring or fulfilling the objective of the future convention. Upstream, midstream, and downstream all involve use of harmful chemicals, including the ones we know about, POPs and other maybe carcinogenic and what they call it, CMS, whatever they call it, so many of them. And so I believe that we are of the opinion that we have to tackle it from that source. If you limit it only to the downstream, it will be disastrous, in the sense that you are going to overburden developing countries, parties in particular, because most of the things that we will be battling with will be coming from other places where we did not produce them. So if we believe that pollution as a third pillar of the triple planetary crisis is real and pollution knows no boundaries, we need to, all of us as a global community, tackle the issue of pollution from the source and then make sure that the harmful things that are in there are tackled with. Many times people talk about, oh, climate change is maybe the worst thing that we experience in the world. True, but then climate change is a chemical issue for that matter. And therefore, chemicals are really important if you want to solve the global issues of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity. All right, so quickly, let me talk about transparency. It's also critical because if you don't know what really is inherent in the products, then you wouldn't know how to also maybe effectively implement or talk about the issues. So if industry comes with a product which we have no label, we have no access to the information in there, it means that there's some kind of secrecy in there. But if you open up some of these issues about chemicals of concern and how they affect our environment, our human health, and then when we are working as states or as parties to the future convention, we all know where, we'll be on the same page, and therefore we will need to do things right. So in that case, we need a criteria that is so transparent that any state or member state or a party, future party, can even propose a list to list a chemical, because we have been working with them and we know what they are. And if the criteria is so coherent and we all know it, we'll be able to really work with and then come up with something that will be implementable, or as an obligation, we can really meet them. Perhaps let me move to issue about the limiting scope of existing multilateral environmental agreements. We know from literature as a fact that now there are more than 16,000 chemicals in plastics. So a lot of them, not all of them may be harmful, to the same extent, but at least these 16,000, they are of concern. And we must be careful that we are dealing with them. If you take the Stockholm Convention on POPs, for example, the scope is on POPs, persistent organic pollutants, chemicals that are persistent, that are, have bioaccumulative potential. They have what they call the environmental transport. They have adverse effect to human health and environment, and they can be found everywhere. But then, not all the chemicals have this kind of properties. There are other equally important chemicals that you cannot list them like Stockholm Convention, and they are in plastics. The phthalates, which are the plasticizers, are all there, and these chemicals equally affect our health. So we cannot push those chemicals to the Convention of POP because they cannot be supported under it. And therefore, the Plastic Convention must look at the chemicals which are not POPs or which are not already under those conventions. And even the Stockholm Convention is 20 years. 20 years, we have only listed a little over 30 chemicals. potentially there are more than 500 ports. So if 20 years we listed, say 30 or 35, how many years would it take us to list 500? Your guess is as good as mine. So it means that we cannot depend on the SWOT Convention and other already conventions alone. We must really have a holistic view of these issues and then take the opportunity under the future treaty on plastics and then bring those chemicals together and accelerate their what do you call it? How to monitor them and also how to control them from that point of view. So I believe that we need to really look at it carefully. I think I have mentioned the 3 points I wanted to mention, but I'm open to more discussion even when we open the floor. So I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. 3 very important points. Halatoa Fua of the Cook Islands, thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Lizzie, and greetings, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and a good break from the BRS discussions in the last 2 days. And it's an honor to be amongst this distinguished panel with us today. I'm also very privileged to have with us our head of agriculture from the Cook Islands, Te Marama Nguna, as well as Leanne from the SPREP team. As we know, the Pacific countries, including the Cook Islands, contribute to about 1% of the global plastic pollution, and yet we're disproportionately affected by its impacts on human health and the environment, noting that we're not producers but more importers of plastics and as additives. From the outset, our Pacific ministers have been very clear in calling for a full life cycle approach on plastics, including from extraction to production, manufacturing of plastic products. The call has mobilized our efforts as INC negotiators to try and attempt as best as we can to raise the level of ambition in this treaty. As vulnerable communities and indigenous populations already battling with the slow onset of climate change, the Cook Islands and many SIDS have very little control of, for example, with plastic products entering our markets. But in essence, managing plastics containing chemicals of concern is both a health issue during use, but a challenge at the end of life when it comes to waste treatment, where the leaching of toxic chemicals via landfilling, burning, and other disposal can pose environmental threats for our populations. For us in the Cook Islands, we don't have the capacity to assess chemical composition present in plastic products and production and the scientific determination of impacts on human health and the environment. Fortunately, on the impacts, there has been many studies available, particularly during the duration of the INC negotiation period. We've seen a lot of studies come to light on the impacts of chemicals used in plastics, particularly on our children, and the harmful effects on the environment. However, for the continuous use of plastics, it is important for us as SIDS that a global obligation is in the treaty text to guide the influx of plastic products that comes through our borders and are subject to credible global rules and guidelines. There's a couple of elements that are important for us in these global negotiations regarding chemicals of concern. Firstly, it is important that chemicals are separated from products for the strongest possible protection of human health in the plastics treaty. We know that this is a challenge in the negotiations, but we will continue to push as much as we can. Furthermore, it is essential that there is a binding obligation to eliminate an annex listed plastic products and chemicals used in, or present in plastics as part of the eventual plastics treaty. The essential elements for a strong article on chemicals of concern in plastics would be global obligation, where there's a level playing field for the industry, where all industry is subject to the same rules, for the chemicals and products to be banned, restricted, or phased out. Covering the full life cycle of chemicals used or present in plastics and products, all chemicals in all sectors by default. There could be some exemptions, but there would be exceptions to the rule, which would be easier to manage and negotiate on a case-by-case basis. An initial list, as expressed by our former panelist, should be regulated, would be ideal scenario and ability to update the list, reviewing and updating responsive to the advice of a scientific and technical body that includes indigenous and traditional knowledge systems. We know that transparency and traceability is very important for us in this treaty. A group of chemicals to be regulated rather than chemical by chemical, as stated by a delegate from Ghana. The level that we see in BRS is still not enough for us, and there's a good wide complementarity when it comes to the INC and plastics. And of course, a financial mechanism and capacity building available to help SED strengthen its management of chemicals of concern in plastic products, particularly in upstream and midstream measures. Finally, the consistent position that we've taken has been to ensure that chemicals of concern are dealt with at the point of production and product design. It will alleviate some of the burden for countries importing and disposing of end-of-life plastic, particularly countries like us in the small island developing states with limited waste treatment capacity. This can be achieved through the banning and restriction of chemicals of concern, as well as enhanced transparency requirements. While we foresee difficult negotiations ahead, we must continue to put pressure and hold member states accountable. We all have our negotiation strategies that we must continue to pursue in these negotiations. Everything has to be on the table until we finally agree on the treaty. It is important that we negotiate a compromise package that upholds the elements pushed by many groups of countries, and I commend Mexico for their leadership, particularly around Article 3, but we also take into account Article 6 and 11. We have a prime opportunity to ensure that we have a treaty that is fit for purpose, that is effective, and it reflects the full life cycle approach on plastics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helitoa. And we'll now turn to our expert panel and begin with Professor Martin Varga. You have the floor.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to listen to the previous statements. That gives me a lot of hope for the next round of negotiations. Happen to be here in Geneva in August. I want to start by commending the many countries that have made strong efforts to include chemicals of concern in the Plastics Treaty, including the ones on the panel, but also including the 94 that stood up in Busan. That gives me hope, as I said. This is essential to fulfill the mandate of the treaty and achieve the goal of protecting human health and the environment. And these efforts by countries are supported by strong scientific evidence. Decades of research have shown that plastics are a major source of chemical exposures in humans, but also in the environment, especially while we're using them. Decades of research have also shown that chemicals and plastics have adverse impacts on our health and the environment. For instance, bisphenols and phthalates used in plastics contribute to public health issues worldwide, including infertility, cardiovascular diseases, metabolic disorders such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and all of them are on the rise globally. The burden of disease caused by just a handful of these plastic chemicals is substantial. For instance, bisphenol A used in plastic is associated with 5.4 million additional cases of heart disease and 431 premature deaths in one single year in 28 countries. Likewise, DHP, a phthalate used in plastic, is associated with 164,000 cases of additional mortality per year. The combined economic costs caused by just these two plastic chemicals amounts to 1.4 trillion international dollars per year in just 28 countries. These health impacts are global in scale, but we are seeing from the science that certain regions are particularly affected, including the Middle East, Asia, and North America. Importantly, a treaty that addresses chemicals of concern will have substantial benefits for health and the environment and result in significant cost savings to public health systems. Indeed, the treaty encapsulates a vision to make plastics safer and more sustainable. Often in the negotiations, we talk about punitive measures and it's all a bit negative, but I want to remember and remind you that there's a positive vision of making plastics safer and more sustainable in the treaty. And regulating chemicals of concern is key because the safety of plastics is a prerequisite for making plastics more sustainable and circular. And I want to be very clear on this point because there are no sustainable plastics that are unsafe. For instance, the spread of chemicals of concern will be very difficult to contain once we start improving recycling of plastics, as they will end up in new products and new applications, and we cannot control their spread. Chemicals of concern also reduce the value of recycled plastics and can interfere with recycling technologies. Accordingly, regulating chemicals of concern in the treaty is a key enabler in the transition to a circular plastics economy. on top of all the health benefits and environmental benefits I highlighted before. Now, the question is, how can a treaty facilitate such transition to safer and more sustainable plastics? From a scientific perspective, global and legally binding obligations on chemicals of concern would be most efficient. Regarding scope, predictions by the Scientist Coalition for an Effective Treaty show that regulating chemicals of concern in specific plastic products as currently negotiated in the treaty is far less efficient than regulating chemicals in all plastics. This would also simplify implementation, including trade. Given that we know that there are more than 4,200 chemicals of concern that can be present in plastics, an effective treaty would also enable a start and strengthen approach to gradually improve the safety of plastics in chemical terms. A clear mechanism for listing new chemicals of concern would therefore promote such approach and would should allow regulating groups of chemicals based on their hazards. Defining criteria for chemicals of concern would create clarity on which harmful chemicals should be avoided in plastics. As the science around plastics rapidly evolve, a subsidiary body with strong conflicts of interest rules can support the implementation of the treaty by providing guidance, for instance, for implementation, updating criteria, but also assessing new listings. Finally, and that was highlighted before by my fellow panelists, the lack of transparency on which chemicals are actually used or present in plastics is a major roadblock in the transition to safer plastics. That puts the large onus on governments, but also on the plastic supply chain. Accordingly, strong transparency and traceability rules for plastic chemicals would improve that situation, but for instance, by requiring disclosure of the chemical composition of plastics, but also implementing a watch list of additional plastic chemicals. To conclude, from a scientific perspective, the efforts to address chemicals of concern under the treaty are supported by the best available scientific evidence we have. Such efforts would have significant benefits for our own health, but also for the environment. And such efforts are required to realize the vision of a safer and more sustainable plastics economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Some particularly sensitive applications are being considered for prioritization in the treaty, and Dr. Jane Munke will consider these specifically next. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel today. So plastics play a hugely important role in today's globalized food system. They enable production, storage, processing, shipping, and retail selling of foodstuffs. However, plastics are not inert materials, which means that they will leach their chemical constituents into the foods and beverages they come into contact with. This phenomenon of chemical leaching is called migration, and it's been known for more than 50 years now. And we know that some of the chemicals that leach from plastic food packaging, like the phthalates, and especially diethylhexyl phthalate or DHP, are responsible for at least 13% of global cardiovascular mortality in middle-aged men and women, as a new study published yesterday found by our colleagues, Leo Tresande and others. DHP is just one of 1,210 plastic chemicals known to migrate from food contact materials, plastic food contact materials. And 1,396 plastic chemicals from food contact materials have been measured and detected in people. This is very concerning, but also points to important opportunities for preventing chronic disease when we can reduce these exposures to plastic chemicals, for example, from food packaging. I want to stress that because the food system is global, this migration of plastic chemicals into foods and their presence in people is a global issue, and it cannot be tackled by national legislation alone. So it's important to point out that some nations do have more protective rules for food contact chemicals. China, for example, has a ban on using recycled polyethylene terephthalate for food contact applications because of increased concern due to higher levels of migrating DHP, bisphenol A, and other chemicals from recycled PET. So addressing hazardous chemicals in plastics is also a prerequisite for enabling safe circularity and global trade. Europe, or the European Union, I should say, has recently banned bisphenol A, also known as BPA, for use in food contact materials, after its scientific body, the European Food Safety Authority, lowered the safe threshold for this chemical in 2023 by a factor of 20,000. And BPA is actually also a very good reminder for considering plastic substitutes and alternatives, as this chemical is very widely used in the linings of aluminum beverage cans or steel food cans, and it migrates at levels which are unsafe or considered unsafe in the European Union now. So removing hazardous chemicals of concern from plastics would go hand in hand also with removing them from other alternative food contact materials. This is an important aspect that a global legally binding instrument can address effectively. It's also important to keep in mind that the two chemicals I've mentioned now, DHP and BPA, are only 2 of 10,000s of plastic chemicals. Dealing with all plastic chemicals one by one will be an impossible task. Therefore, addressing phthalates and bisphenols as chemical groups of concern is important to improve chemical management. The continued and proliferating use of plastics painfully reflects widespread ignorance of the reliable scientific facts and displays arrogance bordering on contempt of human health. Any government that truly cares for its citizens will act now to reduce the prevalence of disposable plastics, especially in direct contact with food and beverages, and especially in products marketed to pregnant women and young children. People who care about their health are avoiding plastics wherever possible and demanding change from brands and from governments. A globally binding legal agreement on plastics that protects citizens globally and avoids imports of hazardous chemicals in plastic products to countries that care about the health of their people is a step in the right direction. And because plastics are traded globally, this cannot be achieved with national measures alone, but requires international dedicated policy. So the science is clear. Plastics are not inert. Plastics leach their chemical constituents, including known hazardous chemicals, into food and beverages. And plastics are a global chemical problem that needs to be addressed by dedicated global policy solutions. And I want to thank the leadership of Mexico, Switzerland, Ghana, Cook Islands, and the 90 other countries that stood up for Article 3 in Busan. Thank you so much for persisting on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. And to close the expert segment of our panel today, Dr. Sun Young Wan. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks for the invitation for the organization by TESS to this very important event. Also, many thanks for the great leadership by Mexico, Switzerland, Ghana, Cook Islands, and many others on this very important topic. I cannot emphasize more that the valuable points made by our dear panelists that regarding the importance of addressing chemicals of concern in plastics. Yeah, I wish to underscore that the focus here is really not on all chemicals in plastics, but specifically on those problematic chemicals that do raise serious concerns due to their potential impacts. Doing so is essential not only for protecting human health and the environment, but also for ensuring that our collective efforts to tackle plastic pollution are implementable and effective. I also share the views that integrating the issue of chemicals of concern into the Global Plastic Treaty is critical for establishing a truly comprehensive and effective international instrument. There are 3 reasons for me to believe so. First, we need a coordinated global response to chemicals of concern in plastics. As also spoken by our dear panelists, while it is true that some jurisdictions have developed regulatory frameworks to manage chemicals, including chemicals in plastics, these are far from universal. Many countries have yet to establish comprehensive chemical regulations. Even in regions with advanced systems, such as the European Union, challenges remain, particularly with regarding to tracing the presence and the movement of chemicals in plastic materials. Without global action, countries lack strong regulations remain vulnerable to exposure, and those with advanced systems can still be affected through trade. Therefore, preventing the use of chemicals of concern in plastics from the beginning, from the design and production, is both more effective and more cost efficient than trying to intercept or manage them later in the product life cycle by each country on their own. Second, the Global Plastic Treaty is uniquely positioned to address this issue. While existing multilateral environmental agreements such as the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, and Minamata Conventions play crucial roles in managing specific chemicals and waste concerns, their mandates are limited in scope. For instance, as also Sam pointed out, the Stockholm Convention, very important convention, but it only tackles a narrow group of persistent organic pollutants with very specific characteristics. So while these existing instruments are undeniably valuable, they do not comprehensively address the wide range of chemicals of concern that may be found in plastics, such as like lead, cadmium, phthalates, and bisphenols, which fall outside the specific scopes of existing instruments. For example, that these chemicals do not meet the criteria for classification as POPs. Some have proposed addressing these issues through the global framework on chemicals. This is a commendable initiative. At the same time, it also bears certain limitations. The global framework is an independent process with no guarantees that it will take up this particular issue. It is voluntary and therefore lacks legally binding obligations, which may limit its effectiveness. The global framework is already addressing a wide range of existing concerns and thus may face also resource constraints. Third, it's not only that we need to tackle plastics, chemicals in plastics. It is also not only that the plastic treaty is the place to do so, and it is that also the plastic treaty can do it in a very effective and cost-efficient manner. Particularly, the plastic treaty offers an opportunity to address chemicals of concern in an integrated, efficient, and effective way across the full life cycle of plastics, as envisioned by the UN Resolution 514 and also rightfully pointed out by my dear panelists. It can enable coherent action at all stages, from design and production to disposal. I would also like to reiterate that addressing chemicals of concern under the Global Plastic Treaty will not duplicate existing efforts, but rather build upon and complement the important work already being undertaken through existing MEAs and framework. So for example, that the Stockholm Convention provides a valuable precedent for listing and regulating hazardous chemicals globally, catching up with the latest scientific development and knowledge generation. The global frameworks on chemicals in turn can help build institutional capacities to support the implementation at national and sectoral level. Together, these mechanisms form a solid foundation. The Global Plastics Treaty can and should serve as a vital next step, closing the gaps and strengthening our collective ability to address chemicals of concern and plastics in a coordinated and impactful manner. While we may not need to have fully developed mechanism for addressing chemicals of concern in plastics right now, It is essential that such provisions are included in the treaty framework so they can be further developed and strengthened over time. It's a long call, it has been a long call to address chemicals in plastics. One of the earliest publications that I found on DHP calling the alarming signal of the DHP is back in the 1950s. So we do know these issues for many decades, and it's really time for us to take action to finally address them and develop a safe and sustainable plastic economy that can really support our sustainable development. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zhangyuan. And finally, to Switzerland, Andreas Binden will consider some of the key elements of an effective Article 3 and pathways to get there through to August. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. And hello, good afternoon to everyone. Great to see you all. So I have the honor and the challenging task to, in a way, wrap up and bring together all these valuable elements and inputs that we got during this interesting and rich discussion. I hope you still have some energy to listen to me. So we heard reflections from governments on essential elements of an effective Article 3 containing an obligation to restrict plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products, and also how such an obligation can balance the need for a strong global rules with appropriate flexibility for different national circumstances. We also heard from technical experts about the need to address chemicals of concern in plastic products. They also shared important insights on specific applications that require attention, on synergies with existing international chemical treaties, on existing governance gaps, and on the need for a governance model that supports progressive development. Allow me to briefly reflect on the essential elements and also highlighting some key elements and key takeaways. So first, there is scientific evidence that chemicals of concern in plastic products pose serious risks to human health and the environment across the full life cycle of plastics. We learned that everything has a start and the end, and we have to tackle the problem from the source. This is also more cost efficient. And as we are here, as this event takes place in the margins of the BRS COP, I think it's also worth to highlight again that many of the chemicals of concern in plastics are not addressed in existing international chemical conventions like Stockholm or Basel. So there is no duplication, and that's something that we hear quite often during the negotiations. If we want a treaty that really protects people and the planet, addressing these chemicals is not optional, it is essential. Second, we face a major challenge, that's the lack of transparency across the plastics value chain. Without clear common global rules, we will continue to see fragmented approaches. This will make it very difficult for governments and businesses to manage this risk effectively. Third, and this is critical, it's not about banning all plastics. It is about making the plastic products we do use safer, healthier, and more sustainable. If designed well, the future treaty can drive innovation, create economic opportunities, and support a circular plastics economy. So what should the treaty include to achieve this? Reflections have been shared on a proposed two-tier approach with a global obligation for all parties and the control measure enabling national action as an effective way to reduce and eliminate problematic plastic products, including those containing harmful chemicals. We heard about the momentum created at INC 5, where a majority of countries underlined the need for an effective Article 3. A global obligation to phase out certain plastic products including those containing harmful chemicals of concern, is one key element. These products should be included into a global list and be restricted. As we have heard, we need a global coordinated approach. As a starting point, the treaty should also include an initial list, an initial global list, to already restrict specific plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products that have been regulated in many countries around the globe and for which ecological and cost-effective alternative exist. We heard here also the example of a restriction in China, and there are many more. A global ban list will create clarity for businesses, reduce regulatory fragmentation, and strengthen protection for people, particularly in vulnerable countries. The treaty must also establish a process to update the list over time, based on the latest science and developments. A progressive development must be enabled. While every effort should be made to reach consensus, decisions on updating the list should also be possible through voting if needed. This ensures the treaty can respond to new scientific findings and developments. At the same time, we are well aware, and we have heard before, it is important to consider national circumstances and capabilities. The second part of the approach happens on a national level. In addition to the global list, each party needs to identify problematic plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products within their own national context. This allows countries to target products that contribute to plastic pollution, harm human health, or impede circularity in their country. Countries can then take the necessary steps to limit, manufacture, import, or export of these plastic products. This way, the treaty can ensure globally harmonized rules while considering national circumstances. An effective article can further provide flexibility and contain elements that enable plastic products or chemicals in plastic products to be further used for a specific time frame, or set phase-out dates to allow more time for implementation. If we get this right, we will not only protect human health and the environment from plastic pollution, but also enhance a circular plastics economy. Switzerland is, of course, very excited to host INC 5.2 in Geneva in August, and we will do our best to create an enabling environment that will allow a successful conclusion of the negotiations and a treaty that is fit for purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Andrea and all the panelists today. We have time now for a rapid round of questions from the audience here in Geneva. So we have some roving mics that will come around to those who would like to ask a question. Please keep it brief so we can get to as many as we can. And we'll take a few and then turn to the panel for responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, and panel for excellent talks. Everything I've heard today, I agree with. We're all on the same page. The challenge is to tip the balance with those who are not on the same page. And I'm fascinated to hear about the voting. I think that's a real option here. But how do we fast track in Geneva in just a few months' time in order to effect that change? How do we really convince the detractors who are still denying any impact on human health, etc., and want to continue producing plastic? How do we flip it? What's the underbelly? How, you know, we are talking to the converted in this room. We need to work out what the strategy is to convince the people who are not, the country states that are not yet with us. Any ideas on that?
Thank you, Sarah. We'll open to a couple of other questions before we turn to the panel.
Oh.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline, and I actually work to decarbonize and detoxify the plastic supply chain. I'm curious, I heard a few of you mention LCA. We've heard of UNEP's use talks tool for LCA. When I was an investor in early stage companies, I saw a challenge even in getting investors to agree on how to measure carbon impact. They all had different tools for measuring emissions. Has there been some consideration, as you've mentioned LCA a few times, on how to get everybody on the same page for what that measurement could look like?
Thank you, Jackie. We'll take one more question and then turn to the panel. Bjorn, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for this great panel. Just a question to the text that was proposed by Switzerland and Mexico. We think mechanically it has the main principles there, but I think policy-wise and politically, the first line we find being very detrimental. And the first line being shall aim to reduce versus shall not allow. And so can you give us some more insight about why you started with what feels like a compromise text to reduce versus shall not allow, and that is reduce the production, import, and export. And I think that just comes to be the underpinning weakness of it, which we worry because as a starting point, as you begin to negotiate, as the first commenter said, as this text is put forward, it already puts it into a compromise space. So we'd love to hear your views about why to start with shall reduce versus shall not allow or shall eliminate. Thank you.
Thank you. So we might turn first to the governments on the panel for responses. Anyone would like to take up one of those questions? Thanks, Halatoa.
Thank you. I'll probably respond to the first question on some of the member states that are obviously opposing chemicals. I think some of the approaches that we're looking at INC 5.2 is how do we change the mix a bit in terms of these very difficult negotiations? I think for us is we have, this will be the first time that we're involving ministerial participation. So having a political will joining bilaterals will be very key for us to ensure that we try and push the boundaries at the political level. And this is something that we haven't done in the first 5 INCs, which has been very much focused on technical negotiations. So having that will also be very important. Some of the, there has been a lot of informals taking place in the last couple of months in very small groups of countries to try and, under Chatham House rules, to try and understand a bit better some of the pushback that we're seeing in chemicals and the likes of chemicals in production. I think what's important there is we drill down into some of the details, because what we hear in plenary or in the contact groups or informals in the INCs is very much high-level concerns around economic impact. But when you really drill down to the details of the economic impact, their focus has very much been on the petrochemical industry, whereas we need to look at the holistic sort of approach. And some of that challenging for us is using data. So having data to support some of the information that we provide is very useful. But looking at the full impact of, health infrastructure is a part of economic impacts. Looking at the well-being, the well-being of our citizens, and I know that's very important for a lot of member states. So I think having those bilaterals will be very key for us going into the Geneva discussions. And that's something that we haven't really pursued in the first couple of INCs. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're very close to out of time. So unless anyone has a burning desire to respond to any of the other questions, we might then turn to Mexico for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Let me add my voice to maybe the first question. I believe that in the negotiations, deep within the heart of all the people who gather, they know that what we are talking about are realities that we must all support. But then they are behaving as if they are not concerned, or, bringing in politics and economies to outweigh effect on human and the environment, which I find very unfortunate. So perhaps if there is a way of, apart from even reaching out to the high level, the president and the head of states or ministers, we can find a way of also reaching out to the populations, people who are really affected. Maybe there could be a momentum from, from down the bottom to the up there, because if they put pressures on their government that, I mean, if indeed these are the issues that are affecting our health, which many of them do not know, perhaps maybe we can get a lot of pressure on the, I mean, decision makers to act. Because at the end of the day, it's the people who are down there, perhaps communities, societies, which have not much information, that are suffering. Yesterday at the PFAS side event at the BRS, a lady from, I think, the Inuit community made a very passionate appeal there. And these are people who are really at risk. So are we using economies and development at the expense of our populations and the health of our people on the planet? I think we need to also reach and make some bottom-up approach somewhere and gather the momentum to put pressure on our government to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. And Tanya Munoz, we'll turn to you now for some closing remarks from Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, everyone. It's very interesting to hear your points of view and your concern. Today's discussion has clearly shown that the evidence is overwhelming. We need urgent global action to address problematic plastic products and harmful chemicals in plastic products. This is essential to protect human health, safeguard our environment, and move toward a toxic-free, sustainable circular economy. Our proposal for Article 3 reflects this urgency and outlines a clear pathway forward. Let me briefly highlight the key elements that we got. First, we see the need for a two-step approach, combining global obligation with national action. At the global level, we propose that parties agree to eliminate certain plastic products. As Andrea mentioned, the idea is not to ban all the plastic. Instead, we propose to have safe plastic products, including those containing, of course, to ban the harmful chemicals. These will be listed in the annex to the treaty. The treaty should start with this initial or first list, targeting products that are already banned in many countries and where less problematic, safer, and cost-effective alternatives are available. With this initial list, a treaty can already have effort from beginning. In parallel, each country will take national action to identify and address the plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products that are problematic in their own context. We also propose a mechanism to update the list over time based on the expert input, scientific evidence, and technical information. The process should be transparency, aim for consensus, ideally, but include a fallback option to vote so that progress can be made. Our proposal on Article 3 is about ambition and flexibility, creating an effective treaty that also respects different nationalist realities. Of course, Mexico and Switzerland are aiming to get as much support as possible behind our proposal on Article 3. With this work, we want to find a way forward to deliver an effective outcome of the treaty negotiations we all need to see for human health and the environment. Thank you so much for being here and for your attention.